All right, we're live.
Nice.
Hello to all our Facebook friends and friends in the universe watching live and watching later. We've got Lara Pacheco here, which is so exciting. And I know Lara from just the community. I don't think we could figure out how we met, actually.
Well, that's funny because I remember you were my favorite acupuncturist at Pocatech.
Oh, okay. All right. I try to have selective lack of memory of all my patients so that I can have relationships with them in the real world
Okay.
after the fact. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool.
hmm
That's so sweet.
hmm
And I also know you as an amazing herbalist and kind of community worker, which is why I wanted to have you here to bless us with your wisdom and experience and amazing perspective on medicine. So I ask this of everybody because I think it's such an interesting question, which is how did you get into herbalism and working with the plantitas and natural medicine?
yeah, no, such a fun question for me. Definitely, I would say it goes all the way back to childhood. I always felt called to the plantitas and the plants and the medicine. I didn't necessarily grow up in a household where that folk knowledge was rich. My grandmother, whom we referred to as Tata, definitely would give me herbal tea or had some really interesting remedios, these remedies that she would utilize. And so I was immediately really drawn to that. But even apart from that, being in school where I grew up, it was on the fringe of like agrarian society becoming more suburban. And so I
Mhm.
remember my elementary school being very close to or being surrounded by old farms and just not really being into like PE or whatever they had to do, but being really drawn to like, whoa, this smells like an onion. Like, is this onion? And kind of just really wanting to interact with that. So I'd say beginning there. And then I had a very traumatic childhood and also just felt very sick, as one would with any kind of trauma or stress, how much that's going to affect your physical health. Um, and it would be those interactions with maybe some of my grandmother's traditional remedies where I would sort of get that comfort or get some of that aid or that help. Um, and then, long story short, it was I was fortunate enough to go to college, although, I mean, I accrued debt for sure through that. But it was through that and gaining tools because I studied anthropology and just sort of understanding politics and how, understanding like power and how like the world we inherited, how it became the way it was. And every place I ended up traveling a lot just on my own accord, and I was always still struck by places where the traditional knowledge was really rich, whether that was around herbal medicine, but also people that were just closer to land and interacting with land and in relationship to land and being really drawn to that and wanting to know more. And so I always had, through my various experiences in my life, I always sort of had like this documenting practice, right? Which I feel like is a part of sometimes this like colonized lens that we gain where we're like, I just want to document this. So I was always sort of doing documenting, and in some way it was great because I was trying to sort of like amplify the stories and voices of people that weren't being heard. But there was a moment where I was like, wait a minute, like I actually really want to learn these things. And I remember there's like a breath of it in my own lived experience through my family. So why don't I just like learn this instead of this whole like I'm documenting it. Um, so it was after farming and kind of living near the forest, just learning on my own, getting books, but also just like being with the plants in the forest. And then I formally stepped into like a herbalist clinical training program out here. And I initially was out here in 2005 doing trail work, and that was like my first time sort of also learning information from someone else being like, this is yarrow, this is how we use yarrow, or you have poison ivy, this is how we can treat actually it's poison oak, but this is how we can like treat the poison oak. But then I felt really drawn to the land here, and so came back out in 2011 and started an herbal training program. And after that, just kind of, being on my path and starting my own work in 2013. So, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And you're in Portland, Oregon right now, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I know that you have talked about on your website just really working with your Taino and Boricua roots, and that decolonization of medicine and those herbal traditions is really important. It sounds like that was a part of your development of coming to the herbs and the plantitas. Um, I'm curious how that looks for you. What both your process of like, what is it to decolonize and or re-indigenize, which is how some people talk about it, which I really like as a positive exploration. And yeah, what that looks like for us, as modern humans in the world.
Yeah. I'll do my best, right? I think there's a lifetime of having that conversation because it's so multi-layered,
Exactly.
But I
Right.
think for me,
Yeah.
it's really interesting, like kind of going back to when I was talking earlier how I went to college, right? So that was this really strong narrative of go to college because that's how you get out of poverty, right? Um, and even within that framework in my household, it being so hard to gather any bit of information around our own tradition, our own roots, and really trying to embrace our culture. Um, so that in itself is like, and it's interesting because with that sort of colonized lens of academia, where I was kind of talking about how I was interested in documenting, that was almost this like way I could access some of that information in a way that was like valued and supported by our society. And it's really been, I don't know, since after I had my son, where I was also realizing more with like the whole identity of Taino, which in of itself is like a separate conversation, where I could own that title and own that identity and really start to dive deeper into some of my own heritage and culture and realizing there's a vast community and network of people around that. So that in itself has opened up so many doors, whether that's relationship to ancestors and also how I inhabit that in my body. So that is one form of re-indigenizing or decolonizing is relationship to body, right? Because that's its
Mhm.
own landscape. Um, and knowing that there's this access point to ancestry, right? There's like a real actual visceral concept of that through DNA. Like that's built into my body. And so sometimes I feel like we hear that often in regards to trauma, but I also
Mhm.
think there's also the resiliency. And so there's almost like different parts of my body I've experienced connection to certain lineage of ancestors that have really been a guiding and supportive force in my life when there's been a lot of challenges or hardship. Um, so that's one. Um, I also think it was learning as I've learned more information and certain words come out or the right questions come out, I'm then able to access more information from my family. Um, so yeah, that's one way. I think the big thing I try to do in my own work is because I think that's the part of it is I always hear people have a response to because a lot of Atave medicine, the apprenticeship is supporting people to connect to their ancestry and their roots. And I get it, right? There's usually not just one type of lineage. And it's also loaded. Maybe a lot of people are like, I don't know, there's no way I can access. But I think sometimes it can start with that relationship to body and kind of trusting or relearning to trust. And then with that, it also comes with land, and a lot of us don't necessarily live on the land of which some of our own ancestors came from, but actually gaining a practice of being in relationship to the land that we're on, and honoring the plants, honoring the traditional people of that land, as well as the ancestors of that land, I think is a huge, huge way to shift um, just relationship. You know, I know for myself for a long time, there was this type of void I experienced where, you know, since I was a kid, I always really wanted to be in the outdoors somewhere, anywhere out in nature. But there was still this like, I don't know, it was like it felt empty or I wanted a deeper connection. And it really wasn't until I started adopting some of what I'm talking about, the relationship to land. Um, and one way I really try to embody that is by really bringing offerings. So that's offerings could be dried plant material from my garden. Sometimes if I've forgotten that and I don't have that, maybe it's like pulling, you know, a piece of my hair. Sometimes it could be through like honoring a song, and it's really just acknowledging like, oh, this is a water spirit I'm visiting right now that's alive, or this is this land and these trees. There's so much beings that I want to honor. And I feel like in that practice in of itself has really shifted that whole experience of when I'm in a place. And that's not to say that sometimes we don't pick up on other energies. Sometimes we can feel sad and not understand why. Um, and that can be a marked moment where there's been some type of trauma or something there that has happened. But at least we can be in a relationship to it. That's not going to sort of overtake us. We're sort of allowing things to move through and acknowledge them. And we're being present. So I feel like that in itself is that big step of shifting our relationship, you know, that re-indigenizing relationship.
Hmm. I love how you speak to the process of it, like the lifetime process of it, and also just the process of relationship, it sounds like, right? Like, um, I hear different traditions talk about all my relations or the interconnectivity of everything. And to me, that is a, such a big, maybe it's the entire process of re-indigenizing. And I've had this experience during the quarantine, during stay at home, where I'll I have enough time, like quote unquote enough time to take walks and just like say hello to the plants and like on a daily and weekly basis see how they change and get to know them like I would a human friend, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And like you, I've been practicing this, right? Practicing learning the like breaking down the paradigm of colonization in my own being. But it's not until I actually stopped the rat race of capitalism and could listen deeper that I was like, oh, this is what it is. This is actually the process. It's just showing up really like every day in my body and like making amends. And like you said, there can be a lot of sadness and grief. Like where I live, there's trash in really beautiful spaces where people have disregarded the land. Um, but it's almost like when you witness the land as somebody with eyes for the beauty and the relationship, it's almost like the land is like, yes, I've been waiting for somebody to say hello. Nobody says hello to me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and then tending the land is also such a deep relationship, like what you're doing. Um, so I imagine that also really influences your experience. You mentioned a little bit about Atabe, the apprenticeship that you do. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. I quickly wanted to make sure I touch on this that came up with what you're saying. And that is tending. I think sometimes in the context of herbalism and when we talk about decolonizing or re-indigenizing is in regards to wildcrafting. Because I think with, you know, there being such an excitement or resurgence around herbal medicine in the past decade or so, you get a lot of people that get really excited about the wildcrafting component. So it's like, yeah, I want to go out to the forest and I want to gather and take pictures and put it on Instagram. Which is fine. But I think that is where we can sort of check in with our inner colonizer or settler, where there's that like, oh yeah, like I want to go out to the woods and get that thing, versus the power in whether we're um, privileged enough to have space in a yard to grow, or even like pots, or containers. I've seen my mother really light up having little potted plants on her like apartment balcony. And that's where I feel like there needs to be a beginning in that relationship.
Mhm.
Because, how would you feel if like the plant you were tending to for a while got ripped out or it started to wither? You see it every day. So
Mhm.
just really acknowledging that that's the best place to start to really begin that relationship, because there needs to be a lot of repair, right? It's just
Mhm.
remembering what it's like to be in that space, because you're right, like we also do live in a society where things move really fast, and I'm not going to be here and pretend as if I like am someone that moves slowly all the time. I'm definitely like with my magical almost 4-year-old, there's moments where I'm like, oh no, let's gotta get those socks on. Let's get those socks on. So it's just, it's just being aware. But like, yeah, that we have this time where we can slow down, and then what are practices we if things do go back. I mean, I don't think things go back to how they were. But there will be the speeding up of things, as long as capitalism really hold on. But moving on to Atabe apprenticeship. Yeah, so that's been really, gosh, I love that. I love that work so much. And it's
Mhm.
interesting because I feel like when I started a business, I had this feeling of pushing up against that narrative of success meant to like grow rapidly. And I didn't even begin an apprenticeship thinking, all right, I'm going to do this and this is my program. It just sort of started organically. The first year I opened my business, I was a part of a farming group in my neighborhood. And there was this really young woman who was just interested, who was a part of that farming group, who wanted to learn about herbal medicine, but didn't necessarily have the economic means to pay for a program. And so she suggested, like, hey, could I do some work trade and maybe you could like teach me some things and I can help out? And I was like, yeah, sure. So it was through that year I started to think about, oh, what kind of curriculum could I put together? And then, I think it was like through the next year, maybe I had put something up on my website and a few people reached out. And so I kind of started to do a little bit more. And then I actually charged something that year. I think it was like $200. Um, and and that was interesting because that year I remember I had this one really sweet woman who I'm still in touch with, I think through Facebook, who didn't speak any English. And I remember she was trying to get credits through like a community college, and I was like, they're not gonna like they will not get what I do. But she was really trying hard, and I remember I was trying to do the classes in like English and Spanish. So, anyways, that was a really
Mhm.
fun year. But just it sort of organically grew, and then there was a big shift that happened where I was like, I felt like I was still adopting a lot of the learning styles that I had learned that were still very based on white men that had been such a big part of the authors and the teachers of Western herbal medicine within the US. And so I really just wanted to kind of reshift. And then I was also like, I also want to bring in more teachers and, femmes of color to be the teachers. So yeah, I started to do that more, and then had a vision of really wanting to support the apprentices to become teachers themselves. I felt like my experience in herbal education was very disempowering, and almost, basically encouraged me to not teach, or if I wanted to teach, maybe I should
Mhm.
just teach something simple. I mean, that was exactly what was communicated to me from my main teachers, and I wanted the exact opposite, right? Because and so much of it is about that decolonizing, re-indigenizing piece is especially so many folks of color that I feel so passionate about is our traditions, right? We're such powerful vehicles of medicine. And because of assimilation and colonization, have really, people are either shamed out of it or told that it's not valued, or whatever the narrative has been. And for me, it's kind of really empowering people to, one, remember, but then also kind of just nudge them and push them, and like whatever form it is for you to be teaching. I think there's a lot of this, maybe it's like that academia piece where we value a certain way of teaching and doing things that has this like academic way where we have to talk a certain way and things need to be proper and people need to leave with like a list of things they've memorized that they then can like spew out to the world. And I'm like, no, like, your grandmothers didn't do it like that. So that I would say that's like my favorite part, is just witnessing in each person, seeing that transformation happen and seeing them teach gives me goosebumps thinking about it. It's everything in that work. So yeah.
Wow. That gives me goosebumps.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you're describing a healing experience that people go through in the apprenticeship. Do you see that no matter what the person's background, or is that are you specifically talking about, Indigenous, Black, folks of color going through your program?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the program is not exclusively BIPOC, which I've got to say it feels really hard to hold that. But I feel it's sort of like, again, that's kind of that checking in of like, what is it I'm called to do? And I feel like my ancestry, or what I'm called to do, is center BIPOC, but allow white accomplices to participate. So, there's like a little bit of a screening, or a rigorous screening process in place. And there's like mandatory classes that white accomplices have to take at the beginning. So those people are basically they're not the center. There's certain classes, workshops they don't get to participate in. So when it's done well, like last year, we only actually had one white apprentice. But they just, when it's done well and they've done that work, it's like inevitably they get to experience a healing experience, and also just witnessing what it's like for folks of color to go through that healing, in a different way. Like ideally, right? Like when we're all doing that work, everyone gets to experience healing, because right? That's an interconnected piece, is when I see someone else who's, historically and currently being very marginalized, like how can I not want to feel better or feel healed in witnessing their healing, So yeah, I would say the centering is healing, allowing for that space to happen for the healing for folks of color. But inevitably, when it's done well, everyone gets to experience that. But yeah, I mean, that's the one thing. It's like we become family, it really does become a family. I had a really traumatic experience in the fall, and it was so beautiful to be able to step away and then see those apprentices really come together and give me support, and then also allowed to like kind of stepping into a place where they were supporting the next cohort to kind of come in, and I was like, yes, okay, that's like, I'm doing something right. Like that's the way it should be. I don't want to be this like one person in, power that's holding it in. Like I got my issues, like how can we all really witness each other's struggles and give each other support? Like that's how it should be. So
Yeah. Wow. True community. I got to witness some of that love at the Portland Plant Medicine Gathering, where your apprentices showed up with like for you in your stead, and it was really beautiful. Yeah, the love was so apparent. Yeah, just taking that in.
yeah, I feel it.
And even that, I mean, that is so decolonizing, right? The unraveling that hierarchy that usually happens in, learning spaces where one person knows and other people don't know. And rather acknowledging that we all come with our own expertise. And if we're talking about body wisdom, then we all have that. And we're all coming with that beauty to the table.
Hmm.
Yeah, what does it mean to honor that? It sounds like your apprenticeship is a experiment in that, a living experiment,
Yeah,
which
it was
is
a great way to
beautiful.
describe it. Yeah, definitely an experiment.
Totally. And I know you do a lot of work kind of in the community, in communities of color, making sure that herbalism, that herbs are accessible. And what has that experience been for you? What do you, you've talked a little bit about the power of reclaiming roots and traditions and honoring, the traditions that are out there in us. What does that actually look like when you're working in the community?
So a lot of times it's been like when I've done a pop-up clinic, let's say here in the neighborhood, it's almost an exchange of storytelling. It's kind of like,
Mm,
it depends on where someone's at, right? If someone's really struggling, I'm not gonna I might focus on what it is they're struggling with just to make sure that I'm prioritizing their needs. But sometimes it's like, where are you from? And wow, did you grow up with certain remedies? I think that's the piece for me is the assumption people make sometimes about just because maybe they learned about some herbs at an herb school that's like the only source that exists. And I think especially depending on what your neighborhood is, like Coley is very rich in diversity, people from all over, and like recent immigrants that likely still have more remedies or like folk medicine still in the family. And so a lot of that is just by asking and then checking in with them, like, oh, what are some of the ways have you dealt with it through those remedies? So I feel like that in of itself is this piece that's acknowledging the value in people's practices. Because I think oftentimes already, right, when you assimilate, or sorry, rather when you immigrate over here, um, that it's a piece, right, of just trying to kind of make your way in to not be noticed or, whatever the circumstances are, it's easy. And especially with any kind of like medical experience,
mhm,
right, we um, put a lot of value into like a practitioner. Um, Maybe not value, but you're sort of like putting them as the experts.
mhm,
So yeah, I would say that's like one way, and yeah, a lot of it's just like that whole active listening, and yeah. So I feel like that's definitely one way I've seen that, and even just kind of circling back to the apprenticeship, connected to that is a lot of it is giving support to the apprentices on their health issues, because all the medicine we make is for them and for them to also eventually feel confident enough to make their own that they can take to someone or to their community that may not have access to um, herbal medicine. And then the whole concept around like doing year two and year one is being more practice around. Oops, so can you still hear me?
Yep, I can still hear you.
Okay, good. The
Yeah.
visuals did like my screen did something weird.
The internet
Um,
hiccups.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, just giving the year two more confidence around um, providing, like doing a consultation. Um, but with that piece of, at that point, most people have had that awareness of not making assumptions about other people and their knowledge base and really wanting to empower people. So,
Hmm. So it sounds like both a way for the apprentices to kind of connect and um, practice their skills, but also work with community members. Do you see people validated in their heritage when you work with them and they're like, oh, you're interested in my experience too and what
oh,
I've grown up with and
yeah, people love, and understandably so, right? Like, it depends on what the context is. Right now, I'm kind of referencing more like immigrant, but people that our current administration, no one usually really wants to leave home, right? But like because of certain circumstances, they
Mhm.
do. And So yeah, just getting kind of like, I want to hear your background, or well, I'm like curious, yeah, it's very like affirming
Mhm.
experience. So
Yeah. Um, so thinking about actually the current circumstances of this pandemic, I know you have a beautiful medicinary, would you call it, of seed and thistle, which is where you sell the herbal preparations that you make. Um, what are you, if people are wanting to figure out what to do for themselves or like build a medicine cabinet or have some tools available when dealing with the pandemic, when dealing with COVID-19, but maybe don't have a lot of herbal skills, are there any remedies that you are suggesting to people in the community that they have on hand that are maybe very non-toxic or easy to use for people at home?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do always kind of start with that foundation of like, are you getting plenty of sleep? Um, because those are like, it doesn't matter what you do if you're not getting adequate sleep, right? If you're being careful, like not eating a lot of sugar or like excessive alcohol consumption, right? Like we know that that really can weaken your immune system. And then if people are able to access like vitamin D, I mean, I know it's not as fun, but I do think there's a real substance to making sure that there's adequate intake of that, because that's the foundation piece. Um, and then after that, actually, let's say like in regards to vitamin C, there's so much. I mean, there's obviously like citrus, but there's rose hips, which maybe we wouldn't access right now in the garden. But I remember learning recently about dead nettle.
Yeah,
A really common weed apparently is high in vitamin C.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So right, if you didn't have a yard, finding park spots where, maybe it's like not around where a dog would likely pee. And I will say that's not the worst thing, right? Like dog pee is not the worst thing.
Real talk.
So it shouldn't
But,
stop. Um, yeah, high vitamin C intake is really useful. And then also going back to that citrus piece, even taking um, like orange peels that we know ideally are organic, and then drying them and grinding them is good. And then honestly, it's like our kitchen herbs, our like common culinary spices go a long way. Like onions and garlic are really powerful. There's the all like fire cider, right? Which is basically apple cider vinegar, getting the raw and pasteurized kind, and soaking garlic, onion, ginger, or like hot pepper, if that's something you have access to or like, and letting that sit in your vinegar. That in itself is a great preventative. Um, and I would say the big thing is not being very careful about dryness, right? So if our nasal passages, if we're feeling like that's dry, that's a lot of where our protective mechanisms, right, through that mucosa, are a lot of immunity live there. And so, however that looks, maybe that sometimes, are you taking adequate water? I think having herbs, I mean, that gets a little bit right if no one knows anything about herbs, but you could support your local herb shop like Clary Sage and get like marshmallow root. Um, that like those are some steps that people feel a little overwhelmed with, but sometimes starting there and making like an infusion, you can definitely like look on Google how to make an infusion. Um, be really helpful. So I think starting there um, is a great way. But once someone gets infected, it's a little bit more involved if someone doesn't know anything about herbs. I mean, there could still be that sort of doing steam inhalations, and that's usually someone has cedar growing around where there's been like you've dried your cedar and you're heating it over in boiling water, or eucalyptus even, and letting like those vapors kind of fill the house, but also having like a cloth, again, even onion, rosemary, which is really easy to have access to, and just kind of having your head over a pot, not, being careful not to scald the skin on your face. And, having like a towel overhead and kind of breathing that in. Um, I think those are really simple ways. And then also actively practicing like deep breathing, and getting lots of rest, I think are some really simple ways to combat it, and really staying and eat like once you are sick, some of that just old school global traditions. It's like chicken soup. I don't know what place in the world doesn't like utilize. I mean, I'm sure there is, but I'm just saying there's some power to chicken soup. Where you're putting in a lot of those aromatic herbs, like your onion, your garlic, your ginger, and cooking that, for a long time, and then just drinking that is, it goes a long way. So,
Hmm. Yeah, I think, people have asked me, like, what can I do if my friend gets sick or if my cousin gets sick or if I get sick? And like you said, it's a hard thing to suggest herbs for people because, um, you know, it's best to know someone's constitution, to know their history, to know all these things about them. It's easy. We want, from kind of a colonized biomedicine perspective, to just have a pill or something, right? Just use herbs like medication, but that's not really how they work. And you can do damage, right, to yourself if you're not careful. So I appreciate you reiterating all those old school, like grandma wisdom, basically, that exists all around the world. And I think, to me, it illuminates how much we've lost those herbal traditions where, we're in a time of crisis and we really don't have our own tools. And I think that's what I appreciate so much about your work, is that you are helping people have those tools, so they can be in the communities and, be there for their families and also the wider community. So it's really powerful work, illuminated by this time, I think. And if people do want to connect with herbalists, are you or the apprentices like, doing like virtual or phone consultations with people?
yeah, I am. There's also been a forming coalition. Right now, I think we've been trying to prioritize some houseless camps, getting medicine out to that. I know one of the folks doing a lot of organizing with it, Sia, has been also trying to figure out how to reach out to immigrant communities. So I am open to virtual consultations. I am also like, for example, that whole coalition I just referred to, haven't been as active just because, again, it's that like, how do I make sure I'm doing well before I try to jump around and do a lot, just because I'm doing that anatomy and physiology class and being a parent, and still doing the apprenticeship. And so that first priority is, what are the apprentices need in terms of their like health concerns and questions. But yeah, so I'm available, and then even kind of directing people to other people through like a through email that I may know of, giving people more resources.
Mm-hmm. Anybody that you can shout out here or share with us?
Well, I bet I mean, I'm like, is it okay to? So Sia Hana, I don't know. I think if like, should I give her email address?
We can always put it in the notes. So,
I mean, the
um,
best way is definitely reaching out to me, taking
mhm.
it from there.
How can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, the best way is email, which is my name, lara.pacheco at seedandthistle.com. I can actually put it
Awesome.
up here on this chat thing I see. Is that right? Private chat or live comment?
I wonder.
No. Yeah, I'll type it up and see if you all can see
Oh,
it.
that's not what I wanted to do. Technology.
Do you see this?
Yes, I do. There we go. Yeah,
Okay.
perfect. Um, Great. And is seed and thistle, are you doing herb orders at this time, or can people source tinctures and herbs through you?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I don't actively advertise my medicine. I don't I used to sell at farmers markets, and then for a variety of reasons, stepped out of that. But I like, if people come and see me, I'll definitely give herbal medicine. Um, but yeah, I don't actively like advertise or sell a bunch. And right now, like, the main people I sort of give it out to are the people that need it. Um, but I still do like sell it if someone is able to pay and then reaches out to me. So yeah, and then otherwise, I'll put up like Clary Sage is a great herb shop that I support. That's doing the curbside pickup.
Are they awesome?
Yeah.
I love
So, and
them.
I think you can go online and see their list and what they have available. Right now, I think it's called this. This is a relatively new collective of some of
Nice.
my favorite herbal folks. It's Shiny from Scrapberry Farm and Letty from Flying Dog Heart Farm, and Sochi from Chalchi Farm. They've come together, and I know that they were selling like plant starts.
I got some
Maybe.
starts from them.
Oh, great!
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They've got a
So,
bunch of stuff.
oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I know. I need to get some starts from them too.
Mhm.
So, yeah, there's just a lot happening. And there's hasn't been like a formal name made about that coalition. Um, it's folks like Ayumidi, who runs that chocolate shop in
Mhm.
Southeast, part of it. Siahana, who I mentioned, who's been a part of the People's Health Clinic. Um, there's also Ridi de Cruz, who's a part of the apprenticeship. Um, Madeline Harmon. Um, Cecile Evans, who's a part of the apprenticeship. So there's a lot of folks. Also Flynn Olivares
Mm.
as well. So yeah, great things coming. It's just I think people are trying to meet each other where they're at. Some are more available
Yeah,
than others. So
totally. Yeah, we're all in the same boat and
yeah,
trying to show up. Just
totally.
different
Yeah,
parts of the boat.
right,
Yeah.
right.
And if people are outside of Portland, can they also contact you about herbal contacts and places where they can get, like, are there any national or even international sources that you have for people?
Usually, what I'll do, yeah, in that case, I kind of try to think, depending on where someone is, more regionally, folks that they can be supporting. Because if anything, right now, I think this is also a great opportunity to really dig in to where we are. Because there's, thankfully, plant people are everywhere, and there's more and more. I tend to focus on what's being created, and there's actually so many amazing, inspiring things happening right now in a lot of
Mhm.
places all over. And so, just trying to actively support that. So in that way, it gets
Yes.
exciting. Then I get to be like, oh, there's this person or this project happening, so you should probably reach out to them. So
Totally. Yeah, I totally agree with that. There's all kinds of coming togethers right now and really learning who's in your community and where you can go and who you can connect with. So that's
right.
awesome. Um, Anything you want to tell us about? Are you, the apprenticeship is closed for 2020, I imagine,
Yes.
but people can inquire about 2021.
Absolutely. I'm always dreaming and scheming.
Awesome.
I'm also curious. I'm like, how long is this going to last? Because right now for the apprenticeship, we are meeting virtually. We have a camp out planned where we generally do like a trip out somewhere, and I'm like, we're gonna do it. We're just gonna do it. We'll be cautious, but I cannot do that virtually. Because I will be honest, I'm not, a fan of. There's a place for the virtual thing, but I think there's, to me, more power. I get more out of being with people kind of physically present. And so, yeah, but that being said, I am always also trying to think about, because I have for a long time, I've had folks inquire about what I offer, to do it like a distance learning. And so I hear that and I feel like, I'm trying to explore and be more open to that. So anyways, that said, I'm definitely more available and I have been studying Qigong. And so I'm always trying to see how, I can bring those two together more for what I offer, like whether that's like virtual workshops. So
Cool. Well, let us know.
yeah,
Love to tell people about that. It sounds really cool.
yeah.
Also, will you share with us your amazing t-shirt that you wore?
Yes. Yes.
Ooh, yeah. Ooh, look at that.
One plant at a time. Yeah.
Super cool.
Good. And that's Mama Mais. Let me write that down.
Okay.
They're
Awesome.
amazing. I got to be in like their presence and hang out with them and co-lead some things last summer at this ancestral skills gathering. And they're really awesome. So
Cool.
definitely check out what they have to offer. And I was just gonna put also, maybe this is already known, but just my website, which is a great way to sort of
Awesome.
see what I'm offering or see upcoming workshops. I am offering, one thing I love to do is plant meditations connecting with ancestry. And so I'll be doing something like that, I think in August. So, and actually, sorry, just to add, there's a place called the Wild Ginger Center, Herbal Center. Have you heard of it?
I haven't.
Okay, they're based in Maryland, and Molly Meehan Brown, and it's when they have these herbal conferences, it's like the most diverse. Actually, predominantly, I see more folks of color being teachers, which I'm not used to seeing. And they did form an online series called Bloom that looks so incredible. And so, like people that want to get started into herbal medicine, that's a great program to check out. It has all different kinds of teachers. I'll actually be teaching one on like a little bit of qigong and plant medicine. But there's like, Sade Musa is teaching, I think a canning one. Ayo Nangozi, who's pretty incredible, is doing like a whole series with like food. So anyways, that one is worth checking out if folks are really trying to dip their toes and just learn from like a vast spectrum of different teachers. So yeah.
Awesome. I want to look that up.
Yeah.
I also want to be in your apprenticeship someday. So we'll
Well,
see.
we'll have to talk because I would love for you to also be a teacher. So
Wow, we'll have to talk. That's an honor. Yeah, awesome. Well, it was so delightful to have
thank
you
you so
here.
much.
What's
Yeah.
that?
I said, thank you so much for having me on.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And we'll definitely send folks to you and all the beautiful things that you're doing. Thank you so much for bringing that to Portland and the world, especially during this time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. It looks like we had some folks, but they must have had to jet. So we'll sign off and we'll see you soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you, Lara.
Bye.
Be safe and well.
Thank you. You too.